Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes to let people filter in before we get started. Okay, I think we can get started now. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Carly Salah, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us today for our Partnering for Success webinar series. Today, we're going to be discussing Parks and Recreation risks and liability. We will be recording today's webinar, and you will receive a link to this and it will be sent to all registered participants after the webinar is complete. As we progress through the presentation, feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box. We'll try and get to them at the end if we have open time. If not, we'll make sure that we answer those for you and send them out in an email. Our presenter today is Public Entity Partners' very own loss control consultant, Bob Lynch. Bob joined PEP in 2017 and has over 3 decades of experience in risk management and public administration. Bob dedicated 28 years of service with the city of Cookeville, including roles in the fire service and as a safety coordinator, and brings a wealth of knowledge to his current position at Public Entity Partners. Holding certifications in fire inspection, emergency medical services, and various firefighting disciplines, Bob's expertise is further underscored by his educational achievements, including degrees from Ball State Community College and Tennessee Technological University. Bob has been recognized for his contributions to the field, receiving the Prima Chapter Service Award in 2021 and serving as president of the Tennessee Prima Chapter for multiple terms. And with that, I'll hand the webinar over to Mr. Bob Lynch.
Thank you, Carly. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking some time to come and listen and maybe chat back and forth a bit. The introduction, I'll let you guys decide. Some of those things are actually true, and I'll let you pick out which ones. But at any rate, we'll talk a little bit about Parks and Recreation, reducing the risks, protecting the community, protecting our children. And with that being said, we'll jump in. The first thing I want to talk about is the impact of our parks. And, recreational activities, community engagement, economic development. All of our facilities, they're a huge draw to the communities, and they make an impact on a lot of different levels. They improve the standard of living for our citizens, visitors, their families that come in from out of town. But with all of the good that they offer, each of the attractions, each of the facilities that we have and maintain, you have and maintain, they do come with associated liabilities and exposures. There's going to be a couple key terms that you'll hear me use and refer to going through. One is going to be reasonable. The other is going to be, the topic of documented regular inspections. And we've got a goal here in mind. Our goal is to protect the health and well-being of the children, first and foremost, and then minimize the liability exposures to the city or entity that owns the facilities that we're visiting. Topics of discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about liability and negligence, walking trails, pavilions, playgrounds, ballparks, and again, the importance of the regular documented inspections. So to jump into the liability, we've got some stair steps: negligence, gross negligence, deliberate indifference, and conduct that shocks the conscience. These are all civil wrongs. And as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the remedy for a civil wrong is money. And so starting at the lower end of the scale with negligence, this is a mistake. We overlook something, it's an oops. Graduating up to the gross negligence, we had knowledge. So there's going to be a reckless disregard, excuse me, and it appears to be a conscious decision to violate somebody else's rights to safety. And you'll watch these dollar signs climb as we step up. The deliberate indifference. It's foreseeable that an injury or accident is going to happen if we don't do something to mitigate a hazard. And then on the top end of the scale is conduct that shocks the conscience. The two in the middle, gross negligence and deliberate indifference, are those are the important ones. And shocking the conscience, keep in mind, whose conscience are we actually shocking? Is it going to be the visitor? Is it going to be the parent? Is it going to be the owner? Well, no, that's going to be the judge and jury. So our actions shock the conscience of those folks, and that impacts the backside. And all of this jumps into the definition of negligence. These 4 items, the duty to act, a breach of duty, the proximate cause because of that breach, and then there's got to be an actual injury or property damage that occurred. All 4 of those have to be proven in order to confirm or prove negligence. So as far as the duty to react, or duty to act rather, we absolutely have a duty to act to maintain our grounds, our facilities, and equipment. Okay, how do we breach that duty? Failure to inspect, failure to maintain, and failure to repair. There is a breach. Proximate cause. If we fail to maintain a specific piece of equipment or the grounds, that's going to be your cause of injury. And then at the last, the injury did in fact occur. But all 4 of these elements have to be established to prove. Governments do have some protection. We do have a bit of a safety net through the Tennessee Governmental Tort Liability Act. This is financial protection for both the local government and taxpayers for monetary limits. Those limits are going to be $300,000 for a bodily injury or death of any one person in any one accident or occurrence. It's capped at $700,000 for multiple people in any one accident. And then $100,000 is the cap for property damage or injury, destruction of property in any one. They did, however, remove immunity from these 4 things at the bottom. Negligent operation of a vehicle, defective, unsafe, dangerous streets, sidewalks, traffic control. What we're talking about today, dangerous structures, public buildings, playground equipment, so on and so forth. And then an injury caused by the negligent act or omission of an employee. So the risks, what are the risks at any given point in time in any park? We have weather, we have equipment, we have the general public itself, nature. And then if you'll notice at the bottom of this, there's the question marks. We'll take a walk through a park, but I want you to keep in mind, what are your facilities? The attractions and facilities we have here in town may be very different from those in East Tennessee, West Tennessee, or another part of Middle. So what are the specific risks in your facilities? Can we be a risk ourselves? Most certainly we can. It's called complacency. If I'm in the park every day and I lay my eyes on it every day, well, if I looked at it yesterday, I may not think I need to look at it today. I can become complacent and therefore become a risk myself. Again, we're going to go back to the regular documented inspections of every piece of equipment, the grounds and the facilities. Extremely important. In talking about your inspections, who's going to do that? Do you have a certified inspector? Do you contract with the manufacturer? Do you have specific checklists? You know, how do you go about your inspections and how do you go about documenting these? Do you have annual inspections versus weekly inspections? You know, again, we're talking about risks here. The annual inspection on your parks needs to be extremely, very in-depth, very detailed, and then follow-ups weekly, especially through the busy season, if you will. But all of these need to be documented. The records need to be maintained. Document the inspection, document the findings, and document what you did to mitigate the hazards found. So we'll start with walk into the park. We have arrived. What would you expect to find at the entrance to any park? From a loss control consultant standpoint, when we enter, these are some of the things that come to our mind. Is there some sort of barrier that's either going to allow me to enter or prohibit that? So it can be a gate, it can be fencing. If you're restricting a drive, I've seen some that have chains across. What I will tell you about those type of barriers is if you elect to put a chain across a driveway or a cable or anything of that manner, it has got to be easily seen, reflective, and it cannot pose a risk. There's been several that, you know, with use of four-wheelers, side-by-sides, bicycles, motorcycles, those barriers are not seen, and that turns into a very bad minute. So some sort of barrier to either allow me to enter or keep me from. Then we want to see park rules, hours of operation, any prohibited acts or items. It's a good idea to have a contact number for the city or the entity. So whoever your visitors are, if they notice a problem or there is an issue, then they can easily contact the right people to get it taken care of and reported. So the importance of park rules. Basically, we're laying out the expectations of our park visitors. These are our expectations for you to come into our facility. So lay those out on the front end. You know, another consideration is, should the signage and rules be specific to your facility and your location? You may have different risks, you may have different hazards. Consider wildlife, East Tennessee versus West Tennessee. Do you want to make somebody aware that, yes, there could be bears or water moccasins, depending on your location? Can we assume that everybody speaks English? Obviously not. Do we need to consider that when we're posting rules at the front of the park? And so this is at the entrance. And again, not all inclusive, but some of the things that we regularly see, discuss, and advise on. The biggest that I've found is, how do we keep people out when the park is closed? Give the expectations, make it clear. But you can't control breaking and entering. That's unlawful. Regular police, have them drive through and enforce your rules. So once we get inside the park, we're going to start talking about the walking and riding trails. In your home, how many miles of trails do you have? Countless, I'm sure. Are they ADA accessible? Do you allow motorized equipment, bicycles, skateboards, roller skates, benches? Do you have benches and rest stops along the trail? One in particular is in excess of 30 miles that I know of. There's plenty of places to stop and rest along the way. What we've got to remember is all of these things we provide, pardon me, provide for the folks is they've got to be regularly inspected and maintained. And that goes back to the negligence ladder. We do have that duty to maintain. So the the types of surfaces on your walking trails and risks associated, you can have hard packed dirt, mulch, gravel, concrete, all the above, asphalt, tar and chip, wood planks. Well, the risk associated, weather, trees, the roots and limbs, deterioration of the material, and then again, wildlife activity. With the dirt, gravel, and mulch, that's going to be affected by the weather. Heavy rains definitely going to have an effect on this. If you have trails along the water's edge, how often are they inspected, maintained, and do you barricade those off if you have high water conditions? That definitely needs to be a consideration. Wood planks, they're going to deteriorate over time. You've got the engineered material that's not going to deteriorate as bad, but it still has to be maintained. Tree roots, we've seen this often. Trees along the edges of paths, the roots will grow under that asphalt or tar and chip. It will buck up. It will create a lot of issues with trip and fall hazards. The maintenance of those, the main maintenance of the walking surface, keep in mind that any elevation change of greater than 1/8 of an inch is considered to be a trip hazard. So we'll need to keep that in mind. Debris, again, we're in nature, but we're still obligated to maintain the path that we provide. So the removal of limbs, excess leaves. We tend to see a lot of moss that's going to grow in damp shaded areas on your concrete, asphalt, and tar and chip, and even the wood planks. So that needs to be a consideration as well. As you're walking your trails, you're assigning folks to do this. As they drive through, notice the trees. Dead limbs, low overhanging limbs, anything that could fall out and cause an issue on the trail needs to be removed. Some of the trees may need to be removed. If they're going to be in a deteriorated state or get that way, go ahead and take care of that on the front end. And again, all of these things need to be documented. Records maintained. From the walking trails, we'll talk about pavilions a bit. Every park is going to have them, small ones, big ones. Some are going to have concession stands, some will have restroom areas, but the pavilions, they pose their own set of hazards. And here's just a few: the uneven walking surfaces, outlet and switch plate covers, metal benches and tables. A lot of claims associated with these: missing end caps, deteriorated rubber coating. The wooden benches are going to be splintered and broken, missing boards, and then unauthorized use. So in your pavilions, again, you're going to want to post rules. And again, we go back to the regular documented inspections and the repairs form, repairs performed. But while you're doing that, what are you looking for? And are there associated injury and claims with these? Yes. Trip and falls, the tables and benches. One in particular claim, we had a small child, one of our other cities, fell. There was an end cap missing on a metal bleacher, or a metal bench rather. there was a significant injury. The outlets, if they're missing, replace the covers. And you want to consider, are these GFI outlets, because they are outside. Talking about the tables and chairs, benches. These need to be a commercial grade. Why? Well, the majority of the commercial equipment we purchase is going to come with some sort of warranty and a manufacturer's recommendation on maintenance and repair. So the commercial grade is always going to be safer when you're looking at those. The other thing to consider is basically a transfer of risk or liability to consider here is a facility use agreement. And depending on the function that's going to be held, you could actually require somebody to provide you with a certificate of insurance, naming the city or ownership as an additional insured. Another thought to keep in mind is you want to review your liability policy for exclusions. That could be anywhere from alcohol, specific kinds of parties or functions, bounce houses, rebound devices, petting zoos. There may be events that folks are going to hold at your facility that is not going to be covered under your policy. So definitely talk with your policy holder and your underwriter. And from the pavilions, we'll get into playgrounds. The one thing to keep in mind is with children, we are going to be held to a much, much higher standard of care when we're looking out for the kids. They cannot assume risk. So our signage, our layouts, who we're actually targeting here is they're going to be the end user, but we're looking for the supervisors, we're looking for the parents, we're looking for the caregivers. That's who we need to make sure that they understand to keep their children safe. So considerations with playgrounds is going to be signage, the actual equipment, shade. And again, we go back to the inspections and maintenance of the equipment and the grounds. And I say again, equipment and grounds. Very important. So what are we looking for in regards to loss control when we access the playground? We want to see the access points. How are they going to get from the walking area to the play area? Is it ADA accessible? Is it inclusive? Are your rules posted? Once there, we're going to look at the border between the walk area and the play surface. Is it in good condition? You can have concrete, you can have the engineered plastic, you can have wood beams. What we see on a regular basis with wood beams, they're secured with rebar. Some of those back out. So that needs to be looked at, and they need to be flush with the surface. We look at the play surface itself. What kind is it? What condition is it in? The depth of the surface. And then is it well drained? It doesn't need to hold water. You know, as far as the surface itself, you can have anywhere from pea gravel, mulch, wood chips, the ground rubber, or a poured in place, any number of types. But again, these are all things that we look at: type, condition, depth, and drainage. Then we'll get to the equipment. How old is it? How long has it been there? The condition of the equipment. Age grouping is very important as well. So is there separation of equipment for the different groups of ages? And again, we'll go back to the documentation of inspections and repairs. Our main goal here is we're going to prevent and minimize. You can't prevent everything, but you can minimize the risk of injury to kids. And the second, with your documentation maintained, it puts a city in a better defensible position if in fact a claim has occurred. You can prove what you saw and what you did. A lot of our folks, they will have a third party contracted out to do the annual inspections of equipment. So they bear some of the liability as that as well. But that doesn't relieve us of everything. Your signage, it needs to be posted in a conspicuous location at a designed entry point of each play area. You can have different sections of a playground. They're going to be each for different age groups. Therefore, your signage needs to be appropriate for each. And again, who's the signage placed for? It's not going to be for the children. It's going to be for their supervision. Some people will actually put in their signage that, as opposed to adult supervision recommended, they will say it's required. Now, we all know that this doesn't happen. One in particular, I've been called to a playground in another town. They had an issue with a piece of equipment, very large playground, and they had put barrier tape around this specific piece of equipment. And there were two parents and a child. They were on their phone. The small child ran right by me and my guide, and then ended up in the hazard himself. So the signage of the barrier needs to do more than just say, don't go here. You need to limit access for sure. Age appropriate signage for the equipment. And then again, you want to consider adding that contact information. So if somebody does notice an issue, damaged piece of equipment, then they can notify the right folks. Again, prohibited items and actions. And then we'll go to the metal equipment warning. I don't know how we lived when I was young, but we survived. But the metal equipment is going to pose quite a risk of burn injuries. So there needs to be a consideration for that in your signage. The playground area itself, the accessibility, age separation, sight lines for supervision, age appropriate labels and decals on the equipment itself. And then you want to consider a shaded area for the metal equipment. The layout of the equipment, access, entry points, exit areas, very important. And you can find all this information in the Public Playground Safety Handbook. We'll give you some links at the end to find some of these resources. Following the manufacturer's recommendations for installation and maintenance. Document. Maintain the documents. One thing I learned recently, that if a playground is newly installed or renovated, it has to meet ADA standards. Adult exercise equipment, we see that quite often. And that does not need to be located anywhere near a playground for children. They do not need access to that, not readily accessed anyway. Labels and decals need to be age appropriate. Do they need to be on every post? No. They need to be easily found, easily seen, and accessible. Talked about the metal equipment, risk of burns. If you don't have natural shade available, you want to consider a commercial sunshade, something to protect the children. And in some cases, as old as this is, they're going to be painted. The painted surfaces are probably going to be worn, and that's likely going to be lead paste paint. So you may need to consider removing the older equipment. Our risks associated with the playgrounds, the surface itself, the equipment, swing sets, and overhead hazard become an issue as well if we're in, an area that's got several trees around. The majority of loss control findings deal with inadequate play surfaces, whether it's packed the sand mulch and wood chips, inadequate depth, exposed tree roots, rocks, such as that on the play surface itself. Falls are the #1 cause of all playground injuries directly related to the play surface. And again, all the different types, the depths is going to be related to how far a child can fall. And those are laid out in that safety handbook for the playgrounds. Swing sets, as we all know, the areas beneath the swings, that's going to wear out quickly. They're going to be dug out. They're going to have a further distance that they can fall. So that needs to be paid attention to as well. Rusted or damaged plastic coating on the chains. The seats on the swing sets, the majority of under that plastic is a piece of metal. That's going to wear. The edges are going to wear, and it's going to be very easy for a child to get a leg cut. So we need to inspect those. The S hooks, talked about the paint. Older paint's going to be lead based. And again, the metal play in direct sunlight is going to be a hazard for burns. One of the things we shy away from and we try to let our folks know of is we do not recommend that you accept donated equipment. It's not a popular comment, but your risk and exposure is going to go up with that practice. So we recommend against accepting donated equipment. Some of the equipment that's not recommended, and this comes from the Playground Safety Handbook: trampolines, swing gates, giant strides, ropes that are not secured at both ends, the heavy metal swings, multi-occupancy swings, rope swings, dual exercise rings, trapeze bars. These are all the things that they recommend against. So again, what do you have at your facility? Some of the things that I've found: rail cars, not standard. Big ones and small ones. They're accessible. We're responsible. Hay wagons, missing boards and holes, screws backed out, climbing walls, wooden equipment. You know, there's any number of things, but again, what do you have where you're at? And again, remembering our goal: protect the children, minimize the liability exposure. The first one's going to take care of the second one. And we've got to remember that the courts are going to hold us to a higher standard when we're dealing with kids. Talk about ball fields a little bit. Quite a few of these around: t-ball, baseball, softball, soccer, football, lacrosse, the list goes on. And they each pose their own set of risks. So your field and ground conditions, fly balls, foul balls, bleachers, fencing, concession stands, walking surfaces, the leagues, the teams, are those outside or are they sponsored by the city? When you access your grounds, trip hazards, holes, low spots, irrigation heads, missing water meter lids, these need to be looked at. We've got numerous claims with the ground conditions. Fly ball and foul ball signage, this needs to be on the fences for your first and third base lines in a visible spot. Netting and backstops prevent injuries and damage from foul balls. And again, we've had claims from children being hit by the foul balls, and again, property damage on vehicles from being hit. Are your bleachers compliant? What kind of condition are they in? Are they metal? Are they wooden? Are they stone? Do they have handrails, backstops? How many tiers are they? Coverage on the fencing. The top rail of the fencing needs to be covered to prevent cuts, injured from the inside and outside of the field. concession stands. Is this operated by the city or is it contracted to a third party? A lot of the things we find associated with concession stand are storage of liquid propane, extension cords, blocked electrical panels, the absence of the correct fire extinguisher, or none at all. And then our walking surfaces with the condition of the concrete, washed out gravel. They've replaced some of the wiring and the backfill has washed away. So the walking surfaces are important. With recreational leagues, do you have a hold harmless in place? Something to protect the city there. If it's a city-sponsored league or city-sponsored teams. How do you select and train your coaches and your umpires? Are you doing background checks? Are they able to recognize heat-related injuries, head injuries, so on and so forth? The topics that we covered, that scratches the surface. But hopefully it gives you enough to go back to your parks, your facilities, and give you something to consider and build upon at home. And at this point, we've got some resources for you. Entertain any questions that might come up. But our resources at Public Entity Partners, we have a risk library that has multiple checklists, model hold harmless agreements. We have the property conservation grant that can assist you in protecting the properties with security lighting, security fencing, anything that will help you protect your property. Tennessee Parks and Recreation Association, outstanding resource. And then the Public Playground Safety Handbook can be found at that link. And at that point, Carly, I've ended a little bit earlier. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Bob. We don't have any questions right now. If anybody has anything they'd like to ask now, please type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If not, you can always email me or Bob after the session if you have any additional questions. But it doesn't look like anybody has any questions, Bob. So thank you so much for joining us today. And please mark your calendars for our next session, which will be Wednesday, May 8th. It is on our website and it will go out in the April member newsletter. The session will be a conversation with the new Open Records Council. Public Entity Partners Legal Services Consultant Alicia Hodge will introduce members to Tony Chadwick, the new Open Records Counsel for the state of Tennessee. Alicia and Tony will discuss reoccurring issues and questions that staff in the OORC encounter related to both the Tennessee Public Records Act and the Tennessee Open Meetings Act. Finally, Tony will discuss bills currently being considered by the General Assembly that could impact members. So please mark your calendars for that and join us. And thank you very much. Y'all have a good day.
Thanks, Carly.
Thank you.